Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and today our very special guest is Dr. Eric Bailey, a new associate professor with MU Extension. He's our beef nutritionist. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, Tim. It's good to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, you've been talking about drought and what to do in these drought times for the last couple of years, but we actually had a decent hay crop this year, and that may have changed things a little bit, where we started having some hay. But as we talked about before we went on, late summer was not good for us.
Absolutely.
And we don't have our pastures probably stockpiled like we like to have them. So we'll be probably feeding more hay this year. But you said there's some other options, maybe not this year, possibly, but maybe next year that we might want to start planning on.
Yeah, so, as part of the Ag Experiment Station field days that are organized across the state, I get the opportunity to interact with producers and get, to have really nice one-on-one conversations and honestly learn from them as much as I do, provide them with my knowledge and expertise. And, when I was at the field day in Mount Vernon, I was actually approached by two different gentlemen separately wanting more information about feeding corn silage to beef cows. Along with our good hay crop that we had this year, we also had, bumper corn crop in a lot of parts of the state. And so what we're seeing is a market developing where folks, cow-calf producers, are buying corn silage from farmers, hauling it to their farm and using that as a winter feed resource. And so, I wanted to kind of focus on some tips and things to look out for with maybe utilizing some of this corn silage, because you're absolutely right. Pasture conditions are deteriorating pretty rapidly, but thankfully many folks got not only a spring cutting of hay, but also a second summer cutting of hay. So our barns are filling back up, but now there's also this supply of corn silage that's available. And the question that's coming up is, where does it fit into this plan? And can I use some of that corn silage to defray the use of my hay, especially if I have to get into my hay supplies early this fall?
But now you're talking about corn silage that we chop green.
Corn silage that would be from the 2024 crop, yes,
right.
Not 25 planning for next year. So,
but most of that corn's harvested, isn't it?
So most of that corn is harvested, but corn silage needs to ferment for a minimum of 30 to 60 days, and we generally start harvesting corn silage in early August. So,
right.
So the reason I think that there was a lot of interest in it is that now is about the time where bunkers and pits and silos are being opened up, and that transacting is occurring where, cow-calf producers might be soliciting that, or farmers be marketing it to the cow-calf producers.
Because normally we think of corn silage is more dairy.
Absolutely. Completely
and
agree.
not so much beef.
Absolutely.
So what are some good tips?
Well, the first thing I think a cow-calf producer has to recognize is that you're feeding a feed that is more than likely 2 parts moisture and 1 part water. So if you're accustomed to feeding a beef cow 30 pounds of hay per day, you're really feeding her 27 pounds of dry feed and 3 pounds of water, right? Because even dry hay has 10% moisture. But in this case, if you were to feed a cow 30 pounds of corn silage, you're feeding her 20 pounds of water and 10 pounds of dry feed. So, making an adjustment. Second to that, right, corn silage is usually, a rule of thumb is that on a dry matter basis, it's half corn grain and half leaf, husk, and cob, right? So you've got half fiber, half grain. So you've got a higher nutritional value, especially thinking about, typical fescue hay, 50, 52, 50, maybe 55% TDN. Corn silage is going to be 70, 72, 74% TDN. So it's going to be, on an energy density basis, it's going to be a lot higher, which can benefit, especially, I think, where the first place I would deploy corn silage if I had the opportunity to buy it, and some other boxes that I want to get checked, it's in feeding a fall calving cow who's at peak lactation, right? Because that's the weakness of the fall calving system, is that we're peak cow nutrient requirements are occurring during a time of declining forage quality and forage availability.
And that would be in late fall.
Late fall, exactly. Yeah, late fall going into winter, right? So, think about trying to raise a calf and make milk on 50 TDN fescue hay and a little bit of supplement, right?
So as you mentioned, you chop it in August, but you really want 60 days, you said, to ferment?
Minimum of 30 to 60, and the way that I like to describe this to producers who are not familiar with the process is we're essentially trying to pickle this feed to preserve it, right? So what happens is we get it chopped, we pack it in a bunker or a silo or a bag or a pit or even just a pile. And what we're trying to do through this packing process is exclude oxygen, because oxygen is going to allow for aerobic respiration to occur, for mold, stuff like non-beneficial microbes to grow and spoil the feed. But if we exclude all of the oxygen, then we get anaerobic, or without oxygen, fermentation occurs. And the byproduct of this fermentation are organic acids that actually have a low pH. They're very acidic, and so that actually kills all of the bad bugs off. And so we'll end up, when corn silage is ready to harvest, the pH is going to be below 5. When it's ready to feed out after it's been stored. That process generally takes in the neighborhood of 3 weeks, but we generally try to put a cushion on that to allow for a margin of safety, and also for further breakdown of some of the feed itself.
So we're breaking down some of our lignans and that sort of thing also?
So generally what's happening is we're using some of the starch at first, and then secondarily you'll start to see some hemicellulose and some cellulose also become digested. Now, we're not improving the feed quality by making silage out of it, but we're preserving it. We're just changing the form, because it's actually the same microbes that are producing, that are fermenting fiber in the rumen. So what we're looking for out of good corn silage is to produce organic acids like lactate, acetate, particularly lactate, because it's a lower pH, it's a stronger acid. These are the same VFAs, volatile fatty acids, that are produced in the rumen, actually. So
isn't that the compounds that give us Charlie horses in our muscles?
So lactic acid is absolutely the same compound that is produced after strenuous exercise, right? So what happens is when we get into strenuous exercise, we go from aerobic breakdown of nutrients to anaerobic, and that's when the lactic acid is produced, when we get into that intense exercise.
So it's the same process, anaerobic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's feed or within our own bodies. Oh, I never thought about that way. That's great. So, but it looks like we have a high energy product then.
We do have a high energy
Very high energy product.
I would say moderately high energy product. So, risk of rumen acidosis and things like that are relatively modest with this type of feed. My concern more so is with farmers maybe underfeeding due to not being accustomed to having to put that much water out in the feed bunk. That's a big concern. I would say the second thing that I would run into with producers feeding it is lots of waste, right? So if you're not set up with bunks, this is not something that you're going to go out and put out free choice like you would a round bale of hay as well. I've seen some guys put corn silage out in tractor tires and not weigh it out, just kind of put it out free choice. That's a pretty wasteful way of feeding it. I mean, if the price is right, I could see why one might do that, but this is really something that you ought to consider, having a truck with scales that you can put it out, or have some way of kind of, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? So,
and we want them to take all in that one day. We don't want to sit around for 2 days.
Well, and that, you bring up an excellent point as well, Tim, is this is not, because this is an anaerobic fermentation process. When we re-expose it to oxygen, we essentially set off a countdown, right? So this feed is being re-exposed to oxygen. Those bacteria that we had inactivated with the low pH, they didn't die. They just took a time out.
Uh-huh.
And so they reactivate once they come in contact with oxygen. And so then we will begin to see mold and spoilage of this feed occurring. And so it doesn't have an infinite shelf life in the bunk. It doesn't have an infinite shelf life if you were to say go and buy it out of somebody else's bunker or pit. You know, I had a great conversation with a gentleman about, you know, how frequently should I take delivery of corn silage if I didn't raise the corn, I don't own the bunker that it's in, you know, and he was wanting to basically go take a couple of semi-loads a month and take them to his place just for efficiency's sake.
Sure.
Which I appreciate the logistics, but my concern is that you're essentially exposing all of that feed to oxygen, and then you're going to let it sit for a month, and you're going to feed it out gradually. And I'm just not comfortable with that. I especially if we continue to have kind of a warm-ish fall. You know, what I'm telling people is it's a week or less that they need to be either taking delivery on an amount that they can feed in a week, and they certainly don't want to be doing just a complete free choice deal because it's going to spoil. And you know, even to that point, the production of acids, you know, silage has kind of a unique smell to it, right? So, you know, there's even chances that, you know, cattle might turn their nose up at it the first day or two just because it's a novel feed and they're pretty risk averse. Exactly.
Someone once told me you bring cattle in from like New York State who are used to corn silage, or you took ours from Missouri to New York State, they wouldn't know what to do with it. You know, that they get used to it.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's a different feed stuff, but it doesn't take them long to adapt. I don't have a lot of concerns with it, and you know that also brings up another point. You know, a common question that I'll get with corn silage feeding is, do I need to add dry hay to it? So there's enough fiber in corn silage to feed it without the need for hay in the diet. Now, there's two reasons why I generally do not recommend adding hay to a corn silage diet. One, you've probably made the decision to buy corn silage because it's reasonably priced relative to hay. And so if you're mixing a more expensive ingredient, the hay, with your cheaper ingredient, the corn silage, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there. Second, you're also mixing a 70 TDN feed with a 50 TDN feed, and so you're lowering the energy density of the feed as well. So, you know, now with hay being, you know, the most recent Missouri Department of Ag weekly market summary, you know, they're still reporting, you know, strong supplies of hay, light to moderate demand for hay, you know, and in, you know, round bales of grass hay being in the $40 to $60 a bale range, which if you assume that's 1,000 pounds per bale, that's roughly $80 to $120 a ton. Corn silage historically is priced delivered to your farm in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 times the price of a bushel of corn. Okay, so let's just use $4 corn for easy math. So that corn silage should be priced in the $40 to $48 per ton. But on a dry matter basis, remember, if it's 2 parts water, 1 part dry matter, you really have to divide that by 0.33, and so then that ends up being a price of roughly $120 a ton on a dry matter basis. So
that kind of puts it. So it's a little bit more expensive than hay.
So it's slightly more expensive, but in terms of calories or pounds of TDN that you're buying, I mean, you're buying 40% more TDN in every pound of corn silage than you are in the hay itself. And so one of the things I like to get farmers to think about is not just price per ton of their feedstuffs, but price per calorie or price per pound of TDN. And so on a price per pound of TDN, it's pretty dang competitive.
But you are also importing nutrients on your farm.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's got a value to it, too.
Yeah, and in fact, that's actually what I wrote about last month in the Joplin, the Cattleman's News that the Joplin Regional Stockyards puts together and puts out every month was I wanted to provide a fertilizer value for the hay that was produced this year, right? Because I don't think we think about that. And so I came up with a value of $24 per ton of hay. That would be the NP and K value. Wow. based on most recent pricing that I could find on DTPFN, or a website that aggregates fertilizer prices. So
we got this energy source. Now you chop it, you put it in the bunker, but you gotta pack it down.
Yep.
And is there a rule of thumb on that? When do you quit packing it?
So you want to get to a density of about 45 pounds per cubic foot, and so I think that's a give pack. The more you pack it, the better is kind of.
And when your tractor quits making an impact, it's probably time.
Absolutely, yeah. And then make sure you cover it. Cover it with plastic, like 6 mil plastic. Put tires on it. Most importantly, when vermin, raccoons, etc., get into the cut holes in the silage tarp, go and fix them.
Because you're starting at the aerobic.
The spot where they tear into the pile will spoil, and then you'll have a mold, a patch of mold, basically.
Now, at the MU dairy farm, when they get into the silo or to the trench, you see this big wall, but they don't cover it back up every night, do they?
No, they generally don't. And so what we recommend is that if you've got a bunker feeding system that you're not able to cover every day, if you feed a minimum of 6 inches off of the face each day, you're going to have minimal spoilage in a 24-hour period. If you feed less than 6 inches off of the face, then essentially you're going to be feeding 2-3 day old silage, because the oxygen is going to penetrate about 6 inches.
Okay. In that first day,
6 inches of it per exposed face. So that's a good rule of thumb. Now, if you've got a bag or other systems, that may not be a concern, but yeah, and that's also why we generally get pretty picky about how the face is managed, because what we're trying to do is minimize the surface area that's exposed to oxygen. So rather than, if you've got a wide face, rather than taking off of the face equally and leaving portions of it that are exposed for a couple of weeks, you just basically dig trenches backwards, and so you minimize the amount of face disturbance that you have. Okay, if that makes sense.
Right. And really managing that silage is very important.
Absolutely. Because you put a lot of time and investment in growing that crop, one, and two, now you've preserved it, and so don't mess it up on stage 3.
So if I'm in a big cattle area that's not traditionally a corn area, and I plant corn with the idea of silage, get hit with the drought like I normally would, is that okay to make silage out of, or am I hurting myself?
So, University of Nebraska has done a really nice job. That's corn silage is an important resource to the beef cattle industry in the state of Nebraska, as it is to everywhere else. But Nebraska has been leaders for a long time in not just corn grain usage, but corn silage, corn stock grazing. They've done a lot of alternative stuff with corn, and so what their studies have shown is that even drought corn silage, so long as it's at least, I think it's the minimum threshold is, it's either 40 or 80 bushels, I don't remember, it'll still be 65% TDN.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, even drought corn silage is still a viable feedstuff option. The thing you have to be concerned about is managing your moisture, right? Because you're not going to get a good pack if it's too dry.
Sure.
And you're not going to exclude oxygen effectively. So then it's going to mold.
And was it about 65% moisture is what we want?
The ideal corn silage moisture is 65%.
And I've heard folks talk about the milk layer.
Yep.
Is there a publication that actually shows you where that milk layer is, how to read that?
There's multiple publications out there. University of Wisconsin, they've got a real nice dairy silage making publication that I would recommend folks check out, that would have pictures just as you described.
Good. Yes, because that's so important. Another thing that I always wondered about on silage, do I go with a grain type corn or silage corn?
So, unfortunately, I'm going to say that's I'd be out over my skis if I made a statement there, because
but that's up to the producer
and any agronomist that they might be working with, as well. So I don't.
But there is a brown midrib. line in some of them that
So-
that I've heard them talk about, a little bit higher quality.
So yeah, I'm a little less familiar with BMRs. I know more about them from a sorghum standpoint.
Sure,
Right.
I think some corns are that way now.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of opportunities that you can grow a very specific.
Yeah, but I would also say to the producers not to lose the forest for the trees. At this point, if this is year one of feeding corn silage,
Yeah, right. But future years.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I like about corn silage, if I'm growing it myself, is I'm harvesting in August. Now I got some time to grow a forage cover crop
Yep, absolutely.
that I could graze in the winter, or maybe I could even make some haylage out of it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. That's one of the reasons, one of the flexibilities that can be provided to the farmer in harvesting that grain. Because that's the earliest you're going to harvest it, right? So you could also harvest high moisture corn at 30% moisture, which will get it off a little earlier. But yeah, certainly if you're harvesting your spring summer crop in August, that gives you a lot of flexibility for
Right, because having the annual forages is a big part of raising livestock.
Absolutely.
I mean, we just cannot depend always on our perennial crops.
Well, we've got to convince our row crop farmer friends that they need to not tear the fences out and provide some reasonable access to water as well, so that we can utilize that. Because I would argue that the biggest difference between Nebraska and many other states in the Corn Belt is that they have prioritized having infrastructure for livestock to be integrated into crop ground still, whereas many other places, I mean, it's from bar ditch to bar ditch, right, on either side of the highway, and so the fences are gone, the infrastructure for livestock is gone. There's tremendous opportunity north of I-70 to reintegrate livestock into row crop agriculture, and I think the potential economic impact would shock people if they thought about it long enough. But the reality is that the reason it's not there is we sorely lack the infrastructure.
North Missouri is actually probably in the bullseye of great forage production. The climate, Southern Corn Belt, it just really fits that very, very well.
Absolutely.
So we can make the corn silage now, but are we going to have to supplement some protein with this now?
That's I'm glad you brought that up, Tim. I was afraid we were going to get away from that. So, corn silage is roughly 9% crude protein, and if anything, it's marginally deficient in crude protein. It's not significant, but what I tell farmers, with dried distillers grains being as prevalent as they are today, a really simple ration that works real nice if you have the ability to mix it on an as-fed or on a wet basis, 9 parts corn silage, 1 part dried distillers grains. Oh. So that on a dry matter basis, that'll balance out to a ration that's got roughly 12.5% crude protein, maybe 13. It's been a minute since I've done that math, so I have
9 to 1.
9 to 1, yeah.
Wow. And DDGs are a lot more common than because there's a lot of ethanol plants around.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's a very common feed, and certainly that ration can be balanced with other ingredients. There's nothing magical about
soybean hulls.
Well, so soy hulls I wouldn't use because soy hulls run between 11 and 13% crude protein. So you'd take a lot of soy hulls in that ration to kind of bring the average up. The nice thing about the distillers grains is that it's 30% crude protein.
Oh, my goodness.
So it doesn't take much of it to raise the average pretty quick.
Or feeding straight soybeans, I guess, or ground some way.
Yeah, so even a whole soybean, the biggest challenge you run into there is fat content. So, being 20% fat, you really don't want a beef cow to eat more than about 5 pounds of soybeans, whole soybeans per day, because you don't want them to run into issues with fiber digestion. Too much fat in the diet reduces fiber digestion in the rumen. Oh, wow. And so it doesn't cause like a digestive upset per se, but it reduces the efficiency of the use of your feed. So
okay, all right. Well, those are some great rules of thumb in looking at corn silage, and you all have a lot of publications on that they can follow up on.
You bet.
That's fantastic.